Would you please raise your right hand as the president-elect and say, "So help me God"?
So help me God.
Cyril Ramaphosa is sworn in as the president of South Africa following the resignation of Jacob Zuma. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. For Jacob Zuma, the end seemed inevitable. With his country in economic decline and nearly 800 allegations of corruption levied against him, Zuma's own party, the African National Congress, had turned against him. Their ultimatum: resign or face a vote of no confidence. Following Zuma's resignation, the ANC moved quickly, electing Zuma's deputy, Cyril Ramaphosa, as South Africa's next president.
I truly feel humbled to have been given this great privilege of being able to serve our people. The issues that you have raised, issues that have to do with corruption, issues of how we can straighten out our state-owned enterprises, and how we deal with state capture are issues that are on our radar screen. Those are issues that we're going to be addressing.
I spoke earlier via Skype with Ebrahim Rasool. He served as South Africa's ambassador to the United States. Mr. Ambassador, thanks for joining us. Well, Cyril Ramaphosa has been sworn in as the new president of South Africa. He will be the 5th post-apartheid president of South Africa. But the country has experienced a few tumultuous years in the past few years under Jacob Zuma. The ANC brand has been tarnished. What are the priorities for the new president?
Look, I think that the priorities of the new president are manifold. I think internally he's got to cement a working unity within the ANC, especially as he cleans up. The last thing you want is a revolt. The last thing you want is a deficit at the voting stations next year. And so that's the one thing. The second thing he's got to do, he has to get the economy on even keel. And that means building on the responses already of the exchange rates, push the growth up beyond what even the IMF and the World Bank have suggested is its best scenarios. Make sure that growth is on the agenda, build investor confidence, and more importantly, ensure that there is growth with distribution, that young people get work, that we can again begin to fund the kind of services and infrastructure that we require, especially education. And then I think that he has to rebuild the moral fabric of South Africa. I think we were on a moral high through the Mandela years, even through the Mbeki years, and then we nosedived. And so South Africa's moral standing in its own eyes, but also in the eyes of the world, have certainly plummeted, and we've got to show with the zeal and the rigor with which we clean up and fight corruption and put behind bars those who have been corrupt and venal, that I think that that must be the way in which we restore the moral credibility of South Africa.
Well, let's talk about cleaning up. Zuma is gone, but many of his allies still remain in very senior positions in the ANC, in government as well. How difficult a job is this going to be for Cyril Ramaphosa?
The job is difficult without even mentioning all of those people, and I think given the fact that Cyril Ramaphosa is far more adept at using a scalpel than a hatchet, I think he will allow the dominoes to fall in a particular sequence. Already the country is on high, not only because of a new president, but also because the Guptas are being put to terms, arrests are being made, asset forfeiture units are doing their work. And so people can begin to feel a visceral sense that things are getting better already and that the resolve is there to clean up and to rid the country of corruption.
Well, let's look at some of the challenges South Africa faces, and you've mentioned some of them. A high unemployment rate, widespread poverty, a wealth gap. I think it's the biggest in the world. Many institutions have collapsed. As you pointed out, the education system is in shambles. Healthcare in South Africa is on life support. What does the new president do in the short term to fix this?
I think the short term is really, in my view, 18 months at the longest, because that's the period within which a new election must be called. I think if we maintain the momentum and the euphoria that currently exists, there will be enough goodwill for him to chance his arm and do things which ordinarily may be unpopular. So the one thing that he has to do is to pull back from the populism that I think has beset the country and get back to the kind of steady growth with distribution economic policies that must come, that attract investment, that facilitate growth, and that allows us to redistribute the proceeds of growth. But I do think his important priority is, on the one hand, to restore the credibility of our state-owned institutions as the engine of our growth. We cannot allow Eskom to remain in the red, South African Airways to remain in the red, and all of them. We must have the turnaround from it being sources of corruption to sources of burgeoning growth. So I think that those are the kind of things that we must do, in addition to the education system that must be overhauled. He inherits a system in which his predecessor had prioritized higher education. I think that if we're going to solve the problems of the country in the long run, we've got to start right at the bottom with kindergarten, so that those who pass up the system are cognitively prepared, mentally prepared, and educationally prepared for the fourth industrial revolution. I think we may be dealing with the system from the exit point, but not from the entry point, if we persist with the policies of the predecessor.
What happens to Jacob Zuma right now? He's facing hundreds of charges. And what happens to the family that you mentioned, the Guptas, the Indian immigrant family, that is allegedly at the center of much that went wrong in South Africa in the last few years? And can the ANC, can Cyril Ramaphosa give us the assurance, give South Africa the assurance that there will be no political interference in the legal challenges that Jacob Zuma faces?
I think Jacob Zuma faces the opposite problem of Cyril Ramaphosa faces the opposite problem of Jacob Zuma's problem. Jacob Zuma's interference was to protect people and to frustrate the rule of law. I think Cyril Ramaphosa has to watch out that he doesn't overreach into the security institutions to try and push along the rule of law. And so I think that it's a wonderful coincidence that what we have seen this morning is the arrests that have been made, the fact that the Hawks have announced today that one of the Guptas is a fugitive from justice, he's on the run, and he must come and hand himself in. I think the president's exit, while at the end of the day he resigned, I think it was such a sluggish exit that there will be very little sympathy for him if the rule of law were to apply to him and he were to face charges for 783 corruption counts and so forth. I think the way he chose to go and not negotiate his exit properly, I think have reduced sympathy for him. So I actually feel that the South African public are beginning to get a sense that there is serious business being done.
What can you tell us about Cyril Ramaphosa? We know that he has a law degree. He was a union leader in South Africa, leading the very powerful National Union of Mine Workers. But what about Cyril Ramaphosa as a politician? Can he build the coalitions and get the support that he needs to implement his program? He's also got a bit of a balancing act to do. He's got to meet these expectations of South Africans and at the same time not scare away foreign investors.
Look, I think that Cyril Ramaphosa is someone that I've known from the time of the United Democratic Front. He played a leading role. That front was the quintessential building of coalitions and alliances against a mighty apartheid state that was cross-ideological, cross-political, cross-racial, and I think that Cyril Ramaphosa has that part of the DNA within him as well. I think secondly, Cyril Ramaphosa was Nelson Mandela's go-to man to lead the negotiations, and he and Ruth Meyer made a formidable team in extricating South Africa from the apartheid government, and I think that it was those kind of moves to defeat without humiliating that I think is really the way in which Cyril Ramaphosa is at his best. And then the crafting of that constitution, he headed the Constitutional Assembly in South Africa that wrote the constitution that was passed in 1996. And again, it has his hand, the complete appreciation for constitutional values as well as the rule of law. And I think that what South Africans are expecting is a reconnection with the founding ethic and the founding instinct of the South Africa of Nelson Mandela. But I think, given his union years, there is enough militancy in a Cyril Ramaphosa to do battle for economic transformation. He's not going to be heavy on the slogans, but I do believe that he has the business acumen to understand how to unlock the riches that largely remain in white hands. And I think that he has shown over the last few weeks that there's a negotiating side to him, but there is a ruthless side to him that when the chips are down, when you've had your chance, that he will be able to come after you. And that, I think, is the really good, multi-skilled person that I think we have in the presidency.
Now, South Africa has an election coming up next year. There are analysts in South Africa and analysts around the world who believe that the ANC could lose big in that election. How does the ANC regain its, let's say, luster?
I think that those analysts are basing a lot of their analysis on the pre-Nasrec era, the period just before Cyril Ramaphosa got elected as president of the ANC. It was certainly before he was elected as president of the country. I believe that the walkout today by the economic freedom fighters, led by Julius Malema, their anger at Cyril Ramaphosa is because, as you would know, Turkeys don't vote for Christmas. And certainly the opposition does not want to vote for Cyril Ramaphosa because he has the danger of putting them out of business. And I believe that we are beginning to see that. South Africans are regaining their optimism. And I must say to you that the government of the ANC wins when the country is optimistic, and the ANC loses support when the country is pessimistic, as it was over the last 10 years. I feel the optimism is there, and I do believe that the ANC is renewing, and therefore it's no longer going to the doors. It's no longer speaking to people in a defensive mode, having to answer for the sins of Jacob Zuma. It can now go and say, this is again what we stand for. We are again the party of Nelson Mandela and Oliver Tambo. We are here, and we are going to work hard.
Ambassador, thanks very much for joining us.